Good morning, everybody. Hope you had a great coffee break. We're now back with our next talk. One more quick thing before we start. Don't forget about the social event tonight, 7 p.m. There won't be another time slot for dinner. The social event will be the dinner. There'll be enough snacks for everybody, so don't worry about that. Also, all drinks will be free tonight, also beer, excluding cocktails. So you have to buy cocktails yourself, but everything else will be for free. Now, about the talk, it's about extending extensions by Lena Wolf. She's a computer scientist and certified TYPO3 developer, and she's active in this TYPO3 community since 2006. Now, give a big round of applause for her, please. Thank you.
Good morning. I hope everyone is awake after last night coding night, and I hope everyone survived the shock of not having internet access. So let's start. I'm Lena Wolf. The oldest TYPO3 version I can remember was version 3.8, and I think that was about 14 years ago. And I spent a while now in the Java world and just returned beginning of this year. And so I went for my next TYPO3 certification in March this year. And when I was learning for my TYPO3 certification, I was reading about signals and slots and didn't find enough information, so I thought I'd just have a look in the source code. And this is how the idea for this talk started. I'm here with my new team. My new team is sitting over here. And we are now 4-5 TYPO3 developers in our team. We are coming from the company Web Commerce in Offenburg, which is in the web business for more than 20 years now. And they also started early on working with TYPO3. So today I want to talk about how you can extend an extension. And the topics I will cover is signals and slots, hooks, Xclasses, a quick outlook to the event dispatcher, which will be coming with TYPO3 10. And I will give you some examples of how to extend extensions without doing signals, slots, hooks, or Xclasses. The first thing we want to understand now is really how signals and slots work under the hook, and what's the difference between signals and slots and hooks, which have been there much longer in the TYPO3 project. So when I want to use signals and slots, I have to connect my extension to the slot, and I have to dispatch a signal to the signal and slot dispatcher. In all of my talks, the green extension will be the original extension. The blue extension will be the extension which wants to extend the extension, and everything which is orange will be in the TYPO3 core. So the signal slot dispatcher is a class in the TYPO3 core, and the dispatching will take place in the original extension. First, I have to connect my slot to the signal slot dispatcher. Connecting a slot is like this little guy here who is out there of his train watching for signals. It doesn't really do anything yet. I can connect my slot in the extension local config PHP by calling connect on the signal slot dispatcher. And here I'm using the name of the class for which I want to listen to the signals. This is a name that the class in the original extension can set. Often it's the name of the function. Sometimes it's just an arbitrary string that I need to know. This is the name of the class in my own extension. And this is the name of some function in my class that I want to be called. In my original extension, in the moment that I want to give the signal, I will get myself the signal slot dispatcher. I will call dispatch, give my own class name, give this arbitrary name that I chose, and I can give them some variables, which are usually an array. I can dispatch a signal almost anywhere in TYPO3 in almost any class. The only thing which is limiting this is the bootstrapping. So I can only dispatch, of course, when the signal slot dispatcher already got loaded. So this is the extension which I wrote, which should extend the original extension. Here I just define a class, and the class needs to have the path and class name that I just registered in the signal slot dispatcher. And I have a function in there, and the function has a parameter. One parameter always, not more, like in hooks. And in this parameter, I can get the information that was passed through me as an argument by the signal being dispatched. And I can, but I don't have to, return my variables here if I want to change some values. So what's actually happening when I'm emitting a signal and it gets called by the slots? What's happening under the hook? The original extension calls dispatch on the signal slot dispatcher, and the signal slot dispatcher gets the data from the original extension. It's doing some little changes, which are just should I pass on some information about where I was called or not. Then it's sending the data to the first slot which registered. And this order is nothing you can count on. The order in which the slots are being called, you can't know about. And you shouldn't think you know in which order they are called. So the data is being sent to the first slot, to the second slot, to the third slot, and so on. If I'm working on with changing data, the following will happen. The first slot will return an array. The signal slot dispatcher will only check whether I really returned an array and whether the array has the right number of elements in them, but will do no more sanity check than that. And then the output gets inputted into the next slot and into the next slot, and in the end the data is being changed by the last slot will be returned to the original extension. And here we can already see some problems that signals and slots have. You cannot really be sure what the people changed and what types you will get, and you cannot be sure who is executed last. The last one will win, but the last one might also receive data which has been changed up before. And this is like the main problem of signals and slots. And this is also what Benny Mack wants to change with his event dispatcher. So this is now, we are looking now under the hood of the signal slot dispatcher, as you can find it in the core. Just once more to have a look how the information is flowing here. Of course, I shortened all of this. So the original extension is calling dispatch on the signal slot dispatcher, and it will get a return value, and it can decide on whether it will be using the returned value or not. Now, when I'm calling one of the classes, the slot gets called here via caller user function. And of course, we do a check up front whether the user function really exists and so on. And we'll pass on the information from the signal arguments. We are catching the return value, and if the return value is valid, and being valid, it's an array and the element count is correct, then it will be passed on as the next signal arguments. So real world, of course, more looks like this. So where do I find the signals and slots that I need? One thing that you can always do is, of course, search for slot or signal. But one of the problem is an extension can implement a signal without really using the word signal. It just has to call the dispatch. You can also look for dispatch, but the word dispatch is also used in other senses, so it's not so easy to find a signal that you can hook into. One thing you can, of course, always do is just debug what's happening in the very place you want to search something, you want to change something, and then have a look if you find some signal dispatching there. And this is, for example, the extension use. And they are not directly calling the dispatch within their extension, but they made their own helper function. Here it's called emit signal, but this is just a function of news. And within this emit signal, there would be the real dispatching. So sometimes it's not so easy to find the right signal that you want to slot into. Of course, some of the very nice extensions will also have some documentation about which signals they provide. But of course, you can't always count on the documentation being up to date and so on. But this is a problem we have with all the methods. So the older method of changing some code is the hooks. Hooks, you should use hooks only if there is no signal with which you can achieve the same. I was really surprised. I always thought like hooks are like a really modern thing, which is really cool and defined and so on. But actually, a hook is no more than this global array. And in this global array, TYPO3 conf vars and then xconf, any extension can use this xconf array and then with its extension key, whichever way it wants. There is no definition whatsoever in TYPO3 of how you can use these arrays. Everything else is just convention. But there's also, you might sometimes see something like SC options when you are trying to hook into something. These are hooks that are coming from the core. But everything else is the same. So usually hooks work like this. the extension will fill something into the global array. And usually the hook itself will be an array, and you just add the last element, which is my hook being called then. But this is just convention. You always have to look at the extension of how they implemented the hook. And then the original extension will use this data from the global array and will call your function with it. So in order for my class, original extension being able to call my class and function, I will usually just give them the string that they need to call me. So when I want to be able to be hooked, I just write a class, my hook, whatever. And by convention, we usually will put it in the directory classes hooks. But this is also just convention. And then I will have a function here. And the function needs to have the same name like what I put into the hook. And then these variables that I get here, I have to define in the documentation what kind of variables I can expect, or I have to look in the implementation of how they implemented it. So this is inside of the original extension of how they usually call hooks. But again, you cannot count on that they always do it like that. You are just for eaching through the global variable. And then you get yourself the hook object by making an instance. You should always use general utility make instance for that, so that Xclassing, about which we will talk later, is still possible. And then if the method exists, we are calling the method and we are giving them the variables. And of course, if the extension will change the way the hook works, my extension will break. And one more interesting thing is we do not catch any return values here. It's not possible to give a return value. So the only way I can change data is by using the PHP mechanisms of call by value or call by parameter. For example, if I give them the data array, I can change some elements of the array. And as I'm referencing the array, just everything that is inside the array I can change. But if I just would return a null instead of this reference, my changes wouldn't arrive. If I would make this array empty and would return it, my changes would arrive. Also, I can just do anything I want with the array. I can change the number of elements in it, I can delete it, I can add elements. No one will really know what I have done to all the data that was being passed to me, within the limits of PHP, of course. And also in hooks, we have the problem of how to find the correct hook that we need. And it's usually easier to find them because most people will call them something like hook. But then again, they don't have to call it a hook. So you can also try to to search for the xconfig string, because this would be being used to implement a hook if you want to follow the guidelines. However, some extensions just use ext instead of xconf, so you can never be really certain of how they are using the global array. And then there are some very nice extensions, which are extensions which are giving you examples and explaining you what kind of hooks they have. But here you can see they didn't use the xconf, they used ext. So this would make it harder for you to find the hook you are looking for. Now, if there is a hook, you should use the hook to achieve your thing you want to do. But if there is no hook, using an X class is still better than just changing the extension or even changing the core. So X classes are dirty, they are ugly, but they are better than nothing. By doing an X class, I can change an extension which didn't expect to be ever changed, and it doesn't need to have to know anything about you using it. The only thing the extension has to do is it has to get instances of its classes by general utility make instances. If it's just directly creating a class and using it, you cannot make an X class. In that case, you can only change the extension, but then it's an extension which is probably not so valuable anyway. So when you want to do an X class of a class, you just extend the original class, and you're using everything from what's Vererbung in German, in English? Inheritance, right. You're using the PHP inheritance. And then you are extending the original class, and you can override any function which is public or protected. You cannot override private functions. And it's usually a good idea, if it's possible to achieve what you want to achieve, to first call the function by parent and then do what you want to do. Or to first do what you want to do and then call the original function via parent. This way you can be a little bit more backward compatibility than if you would just copy what they are doing in their function and then do your changes. So then in the xlocalconf PHP, you can also just register your X class, and you have to go to TYPO3 conf sys objects, and then you first put in the name of the original class and then the name of your class. Xclassing only works once per project. So if I have several extensions which are trying to Xclass the same class, the last one will win. The others will not be executed whatsoever. Even if I do my changes in different methods of the same class. So even then, the last one will win, the other ones will not get executed. Now, if I really have to have two X classes, I can X class and X class. But this is very dirty and very breakable when you have updates, but it is possible. So X classes are really ugly, but they're not as ugly as changing someone else's code and then lose everything when you have the next update. And X classes are very breakable. If you have an X class and you do any kind of update, you have to check if it's really still working, if there was some changes to the API or some changes under the hood which make your X class not working. So now I have some examples for you which are not using hooks, not using signals, not using X classes, and still extending an extension. One use case we have quite often is that we have a model and we want to extend the model. For example, we have TT news and we need some additional fields in TT news, not TT, in news. Or we have TT address, which is really still called TT. And we need an additional field for, I don't know, a certain phone number or something like that. And we can really achieve this without Xclassing, without anything like that. The first step we would want to do in our extension is we would have to extend the table's SQL and create a new field, which we can do in the extension table.sql without calling again the other fields. Just we add the new field that we need. Then we have to define the TCA for the new field. And TCA used to be in the extensions table.php, and it still works when you put it there, but you shouldn't put it there because it has to go in TCA overrides now. The reason for that is the files in TCA overrides, and then you have the TCA there. It can be cached. The one in xtables.php cannot be cached. And also we want to remove the files like extension tables, PHP one day in the future, and so people have to stop using it. But as they are just PHP files and there are no classes and there's no object orientation whatsoever, you cannot really control people not using it for one certain aspect. So just remember to not put your TCA definitions into extension tables.php. So extending it means we have to make the definition about TCA. You can look it up in the documentation of how it really works. You have to add the TCA column in general, and then you have to add it to all TCA types or to one special TCA types. After you are doing these two steps and you install your extension, you would be able to see the new field in the TYPO3 backend. Of course, the database has to be changed, so this works by deinstalling and installing again your extension or in the install tool or something like that. And of course, you have to delete all of the TYPO3 cache ones, and then you should see the new field in the backend. But you wouldn't see anything in the front end yet. Then we are doing an extension of the model, again by PHP inheritance, by just extending the original model. And then we add the new field, but we do not have to repeat any of the old fields or something like that. And after I've done this, of course, the original extension will not know about my class. And of course, there might be more than one class extending the original class, so which one should it use? And until TYPO3.9, it's still like this. You can do a configuration in TypoScript telling Xbase which class to use. And starting with TYPO3.10, this will be a YAML configuration, I heard. And after I registered my new model in the TypoScript, it's like magic. And when I output anywhere, for example, in T2 address, I just would debug my output with fluid debug. I can see that now they are using my new class and not the old class. And I can also find my new field, which I added. So now I can just change the templates and use the new field to do some output or whatever. If I don't need more changes than that, no changes in the controller flow or something like that, this is all I need to do to add some fields to a model. Another example is adding a finisher to a form. A form of the new sys extension form. It would look something like this. For example, I want to send a mail which is also attaching CSV data of all the data that was put into the form to, for example, use it in Excel, as we have the use case here. And the first thing, of course, I'm looking on, okay, how are the mails being sent in the email finisher of the form extension? And I have a look at it, and I expected to find some kind of signals here. I didn't find any signal. I was hoping to find some kind of hook. I didn't find any hook. And then I decided, no, I don't want to do an Xclass. There must be a better way. And there is. But before I found it, I said, okay, you give me this new great system extension, and there is no hook, there is no signal. I hate my job. But then I found out, okay, they are not as stupid as I thought they would be. They are giving me an abstract finisher that I can implement. So I'm extending this abstract finisher. It's an abstract class. And have to have a look on how you do this. Of course, it's written about in the documentation. And I have to call this function execute internal. And then I can build my mail once more and attach my Excel files or whatever. And in order to use this abstract finisher, which I implemented in my own extension, I also need some YAML configurations. And it's also possible to extend existing YAML configurations, but I didn't dig too deep into it yet, how it's working. And in this YAML configuration, I can tell them what is the name of my class that should be used for the finisher. And then I'm using some type of script set up to tell them which are my YAML configurations being used. And this is all I need, and then I would have the additional finisher. So a quick outlook, but if you want to know more about this, you should go to the corresponding talk, which will be tomorrow, so you can still have the possibility to go there. There's a new Symfony standard called PSR14, which is offering an event dispatcher, and it will be, or it already is available in TYPO3 10, but it's hardly used anywhere. So for now, it's just a working model. And I talked to Benny, and he said all the old ways I just told you about, they are still valid, and they will be valid possibly for a long time, at least until TYPO3 12 or something like that. So you don't have to forget about my talk. But there will be a new way, and the new way will be a little better. And one thing that is better is I can define which kind of variables I want the event to be by the extending extension. I want which variables can be changed and which can't be changed, and which types the variables have. And this is what will be done by having event classes with parameters and methods which are type defined. And if you want to know more about this, you can go tomorrow to the talk of Benny Mack in the other room at 11:15 and learn more about it. So, any questions?